Hey guys, tapping on my screen so I can see it better. The other night I finished reading the 5th and final issue of Thanos Rising, Jason Aaron and Simone Bianchi's kind of origin story, if you will, about Thanos, filling in the gaps or just fleshing out the gaps of the Thanos story. Although at the end, there's to me what is a slight change in who Thanos is or what motivates him, just a subtle difference from the Thanos I knew, but I haven't kept up with all of the continuity with Thanos, so perhaps that fit in with where Thanos is currently, and I just didn't know it. Thanos. So anyway, it was really cool, fun read. You know, if you're in the mood for serial killer kind of cosmic supervillain serial killer kind of stuff, it really, to me, kind of emphasized him as a serial killer, and it played a lot with the question of his sanity. There's a lot of other stuff it could have explored, maybe just stuff that I, as a geek of comic books, I would have liked to know more about Thanos' powers and how he got them and that kind of thing, whereas he just seems to accrue more and more power, almost as if he accrues it. Just the more killing he does, the better he gets at killing. He shoots blasts out of his hands. Where do you get those blasts? What are they? He can destroy populations of whole planets. But anyway, that's maybe too geeky of me, and it was more about his character and his soul, if you will. I really like that cover. That's actually the cover for number 4. But at the end of the day, does this particular comic matter, or is anyone going to care about it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, the way we still care about Jim Starlin's early creation of Thanos and the early comics in which Thanos appeared as the main baddie, particularly with Captain Marvel, and in the Infinity Gauntlet? I don't, even though this is a beautiful piece of work, I don't think so. But I'd be glad to be wrong. But to me, origin stories have never mattered that much. You know, there's some cool aspects to some of the biggest heroes' origin stories. You know, Superman coming from the exploding planet, and Batman's parents dying and inspiring him that way. But they don't usually make that riveting reading. They're not the best works about Batman or Superman, not to mention other heroes. They're often important for setting up the kind of hero they are. I mean, Batman or Spider-Man's origin, certainly. But does Doctor Doom's origin matter? I don't know. I always, learning about how he grew up with gypsies and learned math, it never does very much for me. When I was a kid, I remember that DC had this series. I don't know if it was already old or was ongoing at the time I was a kid aware of comics, but either way I stumbled across it, called Secret Origins. And I think recently they published them in a trade. And I thought, ooh, the Secret Origins, things no one knew about. And it seemed very exciting and very important to get it. And there was, what was it called? The Origin of Marvel Comics. That one was maybe the very first trade paperback I ever saw of comics. And then Son of Origins, and Bring on the Villains, and a few others. I think there might have been one all about female superheroes. And those seemed really important to me. Oh, you get to see the very first story where this character appeared. The problem is, you just slowly get like in the Origins of Marvel Comics and the Son of Origins, it would show you the very first story, like the first Fantastic Four story or the first Daredevil story. and then it would show you one later, several years later in the continuity. Usually ones still being written by Stan Lee, so they weren't that new to me even at the time. But the later ones were better. They were more interesting. You were deep into the lives of those characters rather than at the origin. And so I'm just thinking of, are origins ever any good? Are they ever special? And I can answer my own question right away because I recently reread Batman Year One, and there's an origin that is special. It's like a real Rosetta Stone for great Batman stories. But I think that's kind of the exception. And the only other one that I can think of that really stands out to me is the origin of Dr. Manhattan that's embedded within the Watchmen, which I didn't read the before Watchmen Dr. Manhattan to see if they added anything to his origin, but in general the before Watchmens that I've seen add to that feeling that origin stories are usually not the most compelling stuff. They are often kind of, especially when you're doing an origin story like Thanos Rising or the before Watchmen kind of things, they are often just filling in blanks of things that you kind of already know and you just add a little more. So, yeah, and the thing about Dr. Manhattan was his origin was a play on the idea of the Superman, the real super powerful superheroes, whether it's Dr. Solar or Superman or one of those other sort of infinitely powerful kind of superheroes. It kind of played out where those origins should really go if you thought about it realistically. So it was kind of a commentary on, it had all this meta context, which is part of what made it especially interesting. And in the same way, well, not entirely the same way, but Batman Year One, written by Frank Miller and beautifully drawn by David Mazzucchelli, re-explored what had been throughout the years a hastily retold Batman myth. And all major superheroes, if you read them in the 70s or earlier, they were always, and maybe even into the 80s, they were always rehashing their origins every few issues. And sometimes making a big deal on the cover. Oh, Captain America's origin retold. I think I read Captain America's origin retold about 15 times, before I kind of stopped reading Captain America comics sometime in the early 80s. And his origin story was never that interesting to me, not nearly as interesting as all the other stories. Rick Remender tried to play sort of with Captain America's past before he even became Captain America in his recent Captain America run. But I don't think that panned out so well, and it seemed like he dropped it after a few issues. I think particularly for villains, usually the origin story does not grab me. Like, how did Darkseid become evil? How did Thanos become evil? Well, Thanos doesn't become evil so much as become eviler, I guess. That question isn't really answered. I suppose probably out there are some really brilliant comics that explore the nature of evil in the supervillain. There's Irredeemable, which explores a superhero becoming evil, and that's an interesting exploration of the nature of evil. But that's not an origin story, so it's not really part of the discussion. So maybe you guys know of many other origin stories that you really love. Right now, we're getting Year Zero, and I haven't read it yet. I will pick it up in trade. And we're getting the Villains Month, which, from what I understand, in many of those issues, involves the origin, or the retold new 52 origin of many supervillains. Sometimes that can be interesting, like I remember in the Batman Annual recently, where they rejiggered the origin of of Mr. Freeze. And a lot of people argued, perhaps rightly so, that they lessened Mr. Freeze by that redoing of it. But anyway, Scott Snyder and James Tynion had a new angle on him, and it was kind of an interesting interweaving with what we already know about him. So sometimes, in terms of comic book history and knowing a lot about comics, people can play an interesting new improvisation on the old tune or something. But overall, yeah, I think the reason maybe we keep thinking we want these books is because of that link to childhood or that need for explanation. A lot of people point out about many of the superhero movies, we don't want the origin of Batman again. We don't want the origin of Superman again. Although the kryptonite parts of the recent Superman movie were amongst my favorites. But still, because a lot of that Superman movie involved the origin and his beginnings as a superhero, it mostly left me wanting number 2, when he already is an active superhero, and let's see where the ball rolls there. It looked like the next Superman movie would be more interesting. Just like with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, I feel like the second movie was more interesting. So, and maybe some people may argue that even though origin stories maybe aren't as exciting as later stories, where the universe or the world of the characters has become richer, they're necessary, and that those later stories won't be as good without the origin. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm mostly tired of reading origin stories nevertheless, and I kind of appreciate when I'm not given an origin, or too much, or again, looking at Watchmen, other than Dr. Manhattan, we don't get a full origin of any of the characters, but we get hints about their origin and little tidbits, and those maybe are richer, where we can fill it in, but mostly focus on the deeper story of later in their lives. So I feel like there's another origin I want to discuss. That's one reason I never went to the most recent Spider-Man movie, because I didn't want to see Spider-Man's origin again. I also heard people not liking it so much, but normally I would go see a superhero movie or rent it at least later on. Maybe I eventually will rent that more recent Spider-Man. So yeah, I don't know. Of course, I would love to own Amazing Fantasy 15 or some other, or the Fantastic Four #1. But as a reader, I don't think those would be the most exciting issues to me. Fantastic Four #1, my favorite parts of it are the non-origin part. Like, one nice thing about Fantastic Four #1 is it embeds the origin, even though it's done in a simple way and it's still for children, it embeds the origin within a story where the Fantastic Four are already active and busy solving a problem that is beyond the issues of their origin. And that, if you had to do it, an origin story, I think that would be a good template of weaving the origin in with another adventure. So anyway, I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye. Oh, wait a minute. So this is spoilering now for Thanos Rising. If you haven't read it and plan to read it, don't listen to me here. But if you have read it, is it something new that at the end Thanos seems to reject death? I don't know if it's because he doesn't... I think he still believes she's death, but he thinks she can't give him what he wants after all, and he's just alone. Is that brand new, or has that already been established in the Thanos continuity? I'm just curious about that. Kind of liked that touch, except I didn't know what it means for his character. Does it make him even more evil, or more tragic, or just more insane, or less insane? I don't know. So food for thought. Maybe I will reread Thanos Rising to parse out the psychology of all of that. I have all the issues, so I can always reread it. As long as comicology stays in business. Now I'm really saying goodbye.